Tropical storm Nora is wreaking havoc in Mexico. Snow fell in Yakutia. Fiery whirlwind. More than 60 houses were flooded in the village of Nashki in the Kayatinsky district in Buryatia. Hurricane Ida attacks Louisiana. Hurricane Ida is an absolute force to be reckoned with. A hurricane monster filled with lightning. A tractor driver saves a car from being washed away by a tractor driver in the village of Elakonda, Vikarabad district, Telangana. Eruption of Mount Etna. Aftermath of Hurricane Ida, which struck Louisiana.
The whole house is gone.
Tornado near Kollam. Fall in Hillcrest Town, Durban City. These videos were sent
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me. Good morning and welcome to another great morning in our SST workshops or webinars. And this morning we are privileged to have three wonderful presenters that will be presenting on different aspects and mainly focusing on assessment, ESD and issues of assessment. So we have Professor Overton Shumba from the Cooper Belge University, and we have Dr. Caleb Manikoza from Vets University, as well as Dr. Emmanuel Ojo, both from Vets University. And so we're going to have them in that order. We'll have, first of all, we'll have Professor Overton Shumba presenting, and he'll be followed by Dr. Caleb Manikoza, and finally we'll have Dr. Emmanuel Ojo. And just to say a bit about Professor Emmanuel Shumba, Professor Overton Shumba, he's been one of the pioneering people in innovative approaches in ESD assessment, which is also one of our learning action 4. So I think the presentation this morning is something that will help us in our online course. And I hope as participants will be taking notes of some of the things or most of the things that will be presented by our professor. And so Professor Overton Shumba, we welcome you, and we'll give you some 20 minutes for your presentation, because at the end of it, we want to have some kind of dialogue. So we'll have people bringing in presenting their questions and comments about all the presentations that we've had. So you have 20 minutes. And for the participants, as always, we have the question and answer section where you're free to post in your questions as the presentation is ongoing. And if you have any comments, you're welcome to share those. So over to you, Prof, and your 20 minutes will start in the next minute after you've greeted us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany. How are you?
Very fine, and you, Prof?
Thank you very much for the wonderful introductions, and good morning, all participants and all panelists. I'm going to have to turn off my video because I've got a problem with bandwidth, and I'll kindly share my screen for the presentation. I hope my screen is now reflecting.
Yes, we can see it, Prof.
Yes, essentially, what I've been asked to talk about is concerning assessment of significant learning. And in particular, I'm going to be sharing an experience with adapting one of the significant learning frameworks as developed by LD Fink. And I hope that our adaptation, which we have made to it, will kind of catalyze us to think about how we can deal with the issue of significant learning when it comes to assessment and confirming the learning that has taken place. And I'm glad to see that I've got colleagues who have worked with this, Caleb and Ojo. Welcome to this session as well, and I hope you'll be able to extend some of the issues I'm going to be raising. I must say that the work I'm going to talk about is originating from a paper we developed. When I say we, I'm talking Hayla and Caleb. We developed a paper for Fundisa for Change, and it's still being considered for a book chapter where you might be able to read more about it. And this idea of adapting a significant learning framework is actually gaining relevance from the experiences we are having with the Sustainability Starts with Teachers program. And myself as a reference group member for Zambia, I've had the opportunity to see colleagues from more than 20 teacher education institutions, and some of whom are TVET educators. We have supported them to design and implement some change projects, which I'm going to share 4 of them with you in relation to the topic which I'm going to be discussing on here. But essentially, the reason why I'm going to share those with you is to illustrate the kind of things which they are saying in terms of what they value, what is the value added by their change project or by their community of practice, and the kinds of issues which emerge. I'd like to share these questions to guide our thinking through this presentation. What kind of learning are we seeking with the change projects? I'm asking for your reflections as you embark on this journey, which this course is supporting you to embark on. What kind of learning are we seeking with the change projects? And what lasting impact and enduring changes must happen in those who are involved? And when I talk about those involved, I'm talking about those who are involved in the learning process. If you are in an educational institution, maybe it's your students. If you are in a community, maybe it's community members. If you are teacher educators, like most of you are, it's yourselves, the teacher educators. In other words, what lasting impact or enduring changes do you expect among yourselves? And then, of course, the key issue is how must our thinking of assessment shift as we look at this here. Let me share here the change projects, 4 of them, just examples out of several which have been developed by teams in Zambia. I've got 4 institutional change projects there, which are shown in the left-hand column. And essentially what I'm trying to answer is what kind of learning are we seeking to achieve with the change projects? And the issues which are noted in the second column are being pointed out by the communities of practice in their reflection when asked to identify the value which is being added by their actions in the change projects as a community of practice. And one of the things you are going to be able to see here is that they use very big terms, and some of which reflect very higher order learning which must happen. For example, sustainability thinking, collaboration, innovative thinking, becoming a change agent, becoming self-reliant, ability to learn, issues of relationships, and all these things here. And we're going to see that when we look at these kinds of value which they are thinking, I think it relates more to this issue of what is the most significant learning outcome which they are seeking. And it is important for you as a community of practice with your team to begin to reflect what kind of learning are you trying to achieve through the change project. And eventually you need to be able to ask yourself, how are you going to assess that kind of learning? And obviously we begin to appreciate that such learning cannot be assessed by the usual paper and a pencil kind of test or assessment. So we need some kind of shift as it will. And I think the kind of things which my colleagues in Zambia are raising seem to suggest that this will resonate quite reasonably with what the literature says about sustainability competencies. And I'll share that summary on the next slide to exemplify sustainability competencies, which you see here, grouped into 7 categories. And what I like to emphasize about this is, obviously you can read for yourself some of them very quickly. A lot of competencies are being shown here. But what I want to emphasize is that when you look at these competencies, you've got the intrapersonal, the interpersonal, which really relate to the human dimensions kind of things. And we can see the issues pertaining to them in terms of relationships, in terms of collaboration, in terms of caring. So we've got issues of the human dimension, issues of care, and also issues of integration. When you look at some of these here, and we see issues to do with the values. And the reason why I'm raising this is essentially that if we are going to look at assessment of learning in our ESD programs, we need to begin to think about learning outcomes which go beyond just the foundational knowledge. And as you see here, you've got learning outcomes which are related to the human dimensions, to care, to ability to learn, to self-direction, to looking at things holistically in an interdisciplinary fashion, and also the issue of cultural values and ethical thinking, which comes into play. So what we have done in this regard, by looking at these sustainability competencies and linking them to significant learning, what we have tried to do is to identify a framework which relates closely to significant learning. And LD think looked fairly attractive in this regard, because when we look at this framework, it looks at 6 categories of learning outcomes that kind of interact, and each one of them stimulating the others. I'm going to explain that with the next slide. But essentially, if you want to ascertain that significant learning is taking place, you need to identify with a significant learning framework. And secondly, you are going to need to devise assessment tools which enable you to assess the significant learning. As we saw in the previous slide, if we look at those sustainability competencies as being significant learning, then we cannot quite assess them in the usual way, and that is quite important. And so what is this LD thinks significant learning framework? And here we can see, if we look at the lobes of this here, we can count them. There are 6 of them all around, representing the categories of learning outcomes. And each learning outcome is not going to be standing alone. It stimulates the other learning outcomes. And the other learning outcomes will not be achieved if the other learning outcome has not also been achieved. And so you've got this connectedness, which is reflected in the middle here, and which is labeled the significant learning. In other words, in this framework, significant learning is associated with having foundational knowledge, being able to apply the knowledge to real life situations, being able to integrate a variety of knowledges, if you like, and having a human dimension which is related to the care and learning how to learn. And so in this framework, we're going to see that all these learning outcomes, which you can categorize in this manner, are very important as part of this significant learning. And what we have done is to look at this here and adapt that learning outcome, that learning framework as developed by LD Fink. And in this regard, we have maintained the first 4 dimensions: the learning how to learn, the foundational knowledge, the application, and the integration. But on the human dimension, we also emphasized the importance of the ecological dimensions, so that the respect and the care for the environment is quite important in this dimension here. And we think that the care dimension is well articulated, especially in the context of Southern Africa, with the Ubuntu philosophy, which characterizes most of our communities. So it is quite important to see that this adaptation is quite important. And further to this adaptation, to include the human and ecological dimensions, and to underscore the ethical, the cultural values and ethical dimensions, we have also gone a step further and proposed some questions around each one, so that if you are thinking of assessment, sorry, ladies and gentlemen, my network is coming up and down. I hope you can see the screen and you can now hear me.
We can now hear you, Prof, but we can't see the screen.
You can see the screen?
No, we can't, but we can hear you.
Okay, let's see if we can, we need to be seeing the screen on this one. Maybe let me just try to share screen again.
We can now see the screen, Prof.
Yes, and in addition to seeing the screen, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so what I was saying is that we have made this adaptation where we have adapted the significant learning framework as developed by Fink, and put in some lead questions which will help us in our reflections as we plan the assessments. And we can see as we go through the cycle, we can see the various questions here. For example, if we look at integration, can the learner describe, synthesize, and align different types of knowledges, values, and skills in order to contribute to problem solving and change processes? And I need to emphasize here that in our view, our learners, we always tend to think of ourselves as educators and those other people as the students. And our learners here are those students, all right? But in change projects, you are also the learner. You are centrally a principal learner and your whole community of practice is also learning. And so what we are suggesting is that this significant learning assessment model can then be used to think of assessments, not just for the academic purposes, but also for influencing the changes which we are trying to bring about in our communities and in our institutions. And so this is quite a useful framework as far as we can tell. And my colleagues like Manikonza have been working with it at WITS, and I'm sure in his presentation is going to illustrate some of what we have done to come up with a rubric in order for us to be able to conduct some kind of performance assessment, which would help to bring out some of these learning outcomes which we've been talking about. I'd like to end by taking a leaf from the colleagues at Fundisa for Change. Last year, when they were presenting this to our intake, to our cohort of the SST participants, they brought up the sunflower, which was quite a useful thing. And now, when you look at this significant learning framework, you begin to see that each one of these lobes representing the categories of learning is almost like the petal of that sunflower. And if we go back to the sunflower, we can see that each petal is connected to the ovary of this particular flower, and every petal is connected, and every petal is important to the development of this seed. And so that connectedness, which is reflected in this flower, is what significant learning tries to demonstrate, that all those sustainability competencies are interconnected, just like the sunflower becomes a complete flower with all its parts integrated and interconnected, and therefore it will be shining bright in the sunlight and also producing the sunflower seed in a sense. So significant learning is quite important, and maybe I can pause here and allow my colleagues to pick it up from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Shumba, for the insightful presentation. And I'm sure, just like other participants, well, I, for one, have gotten some important points. And I see there's some, I think there's just one question already posed. I would encourage participants to contribute. If you have any comments or questions, we just look at all of them at the end of the 3 presentations. So keep the questions and the comments coming. Thank you, Professor Shumba. Our next presenter is Dr. Manikoza from WITS University. And as Professor Shumba has said, he's going to take over from where he's left off. So Dr. Manikoza, take the floor, and you have your 20 minutes. Well, you have 20 and extra 3 minutes because Professor Shumba was kind enough to give us extra 3 minutes. So you have the liberty of going beyond just by 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tiffany, Dr. Tiff, I would like to say. I appreciate this time that I was given, that I was offered by Prof. Shumba. It's always humble to give me an opportunity to interact in these platforms, and I'm so happy to be here. And thank you, everyone, for allowing me to speak out and you hearing my voice. I have shown a bit of how I look like, and you may want to use significant learning framework to assess my looks. But from now on, I go offline for bandwidth reasons. I am coming in to just show one or two examples of how we have worked with and how we have presented this significant learning framework, assessment of a significant learning framework over in the past, and how we introduce it to others, introducing our views, our perspectives, our thinking about it. And of course, I'm part of the team of professors rubbing shoulders with Prof. Shumba and Prof. Haila Sitka. I really enjoy that space. My God, my slide is not moving. Will you allow me to stop sharing and start again, please?
Sure.
Yeah, and I think I need to reshare it. Yes, as Prof. Shumba has already introduced, significant learning is a framework. Helps us to think about those parts of our assessment that we cannot technically get into easily using the existing or the more popular frameworks that we have been using. And it is not divorced from the Bloom's taxonomy. It was actually developed out of the Bloom taxonomy. And then we tend to think to expand or going slightly beyond the Bloom's taxonomy in order to accommodate those aspects of environment and sustainability learning that are more qualitative. How can you assess qualitative learning experiences as the ones that were presented by Prof. Shumba from those change projects? So initially we looked at an example of a learner. There is a learner who, a primary school learner in South Africa, who was taught about plastic waste. And this is a guy from the townships, the high density areas for some. And this child learned about single use of plastic. And single use of plastic includes the plastic bags and plastic wraps, and includes the plastic bottles, like the soda bottles, plastic soda bottles that we use and throw away. So the child saw an opportunity in the teaching, and he started making small artifacts out of that plastic. This is a primary school child. And he started selling these, showing these to others, how to make it and how to make them, and then selling them. In addition, in their school, they were taught germination of seeds, which involves a bit of gardening, germination of seeds and then planting them and then growing them. And of course, there were potted plants in the school. And this child adapted that knowledge, came home, also took plastic containers and started putting seeds in there and flowers in there, and then selling the flowers. So the question we had then was, how would you assess this kind of learning? How would you assess what this child has learned and how this child has learned? How would you put it into the perspective of Bloom's taxonomy? And then we realized that with Bloom's taxonomy, we would have some limitations, but we would need something that goes slightly beyond and looking at more of those qualitative developments in knowledge and in agency, development of agency and practice. So if we look at foundational knowledge, we say, can the learner identify, critique, and understand? And these questions in the middle are actually coming from the flower diagram that is just been presented by Prof. Shumba. Can the learner identify, critique, understand, and describe the sustainable development issue or concern? Can the learner use systems thinking to develop foundational and in-depth understanding of sustainable development concerns or issues? And when the child was interviewed by the local newspaper, he was able to explain why it was necessary for him to take away plastic from the environment and use it. And this had to do with him being able to explain what plastic is and how it is made. Whether single use or many times use is a problem. And how this ends up in bodies, water bodies, and microplastics, and affecting marine and freshwater life. And consequently, how this impacts, because South Africa does not have a lot of freshwater fish. They depend mostly on sea fish. How these plastics end up into affecting their own health through lack of food, through the chemicals in it. So this child is fundamental knowledge, which is foundational knowledge for single use. And the next is the application. The learner innovates the reuse of the plastic by making artifacts and uses plastic bottles to establish small hanging food gardens and potted gardens, which the learner was able to, in addition to having those food gardens in their small homestead, the learner was also able to sell some of these flowers and some food plants. And nursery was actually, when he got money out of a little money, he went and bought seeds and then was making nurseries of different types of veggies. And integration, the learner links scientific knowledge of the problematic substances in plastics to local knowledge on how to grow food. If at all he were to keep the plastics around them and growing food in those plastic pots, that would prevent them from going into the ocean, which will eventually poison the fish, that will eventually come back and affect them. So that is integration of knowledge, of knowing the water cycle, carrying some of these, going down and knowing the breakdown of plastics and so on. The human ecological dimension is the learner shows an ethics of care for humans in the environment by reducing plastic pollution. And also the thinking that, I can actually provide food to the family, to their poor family, by growing in plastic. So they would harvest, whether it was spinach or whatever, they would do a few harvests once in a while. That contributes. By growing food that others can use, the learner shows Ubuntu and empathy. And by reducing plastic waste, the learner is showing empathy to non-human humans. And that is an ethics of care. Learning how to learn, the learner was able to identify and review the problem of plastic pollution and come up with a solution. and formulating an alternative. And of course, there is trial and error through this. And through that process, the child gets to understand which plastics, which size of plastics are best for which size of plants, etc., etc. So he's learning through the process of engaging. Yes. And as we went through that, we readapted the framework, and then we used outcome verbs, and we said these are the levels on the left that were suggested or put forward by Think, and they are not hierarchical. It's different now from the Bloom's taxonomy, which has a hierarchical approach. But in these ones, they are at the same level and they interact and they depend on each other. And we have a description in the middle, which describes the levels. And on the right-hand side, we have some of the verbs. And we try to bring in some of those verbs from the Bloom's taxonomy. And as I emphasize again, there is no hierarchy, but these are interacting. And Prof. Shumba has indicated the flower diagram. All those aspects, all those outcomes interact at a central point, and they support each other. So learning does not have a basic approach, but you can start from any level, and as long as you have as many of those petals as possible. Another example that we looked at had to do with a task. For example, you give a task to your learners. We often give a task, to our students. We're asking students to do an audit of the environment and sustainability concerns in their institution. And then would describe causes, effects, and manifestations of one of the key issues, showing how these interact. And we would suggest, and we would ask them to suggest alternative ways that education can be used to alleviate or eliminate one of these concerns. So this is a task that is given to students. But then how do you assess it? How do you get to assess it? And in order to assess it, we suggested a rubric. And one of the approaches to assessment. And one is to conduct an audit, and it is the ability to find out information in conducting an audit. And we scaled it. When it is very good, 5 marks. When it is good, 4 marks. When it is satisfactory, 3 marks. And satisfactory, probably there could be another term for a positive term for unsatisfactory. And you look at foundational knowledge. This is the ability to identify, critique, and describe the sustainable development issue coherently, and especially the content of it. And in the same manner, there are levels to that. Integration is the ability to analyze, interpret, apply knowledge, and demonstrate agency to solve problems in an integrative way. And we have those alternatives. And integration, ability to describe, synthesize, relate. The relational aspect is important. And they align different types of knowledges, values, and skills in problem solving and change projects? How do the students, the learners, bring these together? Of course, in an integrative way. And we have the alternatives as well. Synthesis is important, and levels of synthesis are the ones that are questioned here. The human and ecological dimension, showing concern for human and ecological well-being and for relating to others locally and globally. There is need to show care for human and ecological well-being. And there is need to show concern for the human and ecological well-being, and at different levels. Then the care, ethics of care, to show reflectivity and care for community, the values of Ubuntu in other life forms. How does one relate to the rest of the community and the different levels of care that will be awarded? And learning to learn, ability to analyze, evaluate, and formulate new ideas, solutions to problems, and suggestions for change or to learn better. How does one show learning in the process of engaging with the concern or with the issue? So it is a developmental concern here. You're looking at how does one develop in knowledge? How are they able to navigate through the process of engaging with the concern, with the issue? Are they trying out? And when they try out, what do they think and how do they reorganize themselves? What alternatives do they choose and why do they choose those alternatives? And all of that has to do with personal learning and learning in communities of practice. I would like to end there, but I would like to express as well that Prof. Shumba communicated with Fink, D-Fink, who had a few comments, and those comments on some of the verbs that we used, and we tried as much as possible to integrate his concerns with our understanding, and we really appreciate that connection and that direct chats with Fink. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Manikoza, for the further expounding of Professor Shumba's presentation. And again, I would say there's a lot that we as participants and those that are about to embark on our change projects have to think about. So it's not just about the project itself, it's also about the assessment process and the fact that for us to have this significant kind of learning, there are a number of elements that come into it, and these are such that cannot be dealt with in isolation, but they are such that are supposed to work together to bring in this significant learning and results that are sustainable enough. Thank you very much, Dr. Manikoza, for the presentation, and thank you, participants, for the comments. I see some 2 questions, which I think at the end of it, we'll have the various presenters just say out, I'll address those questions that have been posed. Thank you so much. Our last presenter is Dr. Emmanuel Ojo. And as I said earlier on, he's from the University of Witwatersrand. And I'll call upon Dr. Ojo as he presents on a green economy module and the work that he has done with the Fundisa for Change program. So Dr. Ojo, welcome to the floor, and you have your 20 minutes, 20, 25 minutes, because the previous ones have been generous enough. So we'll give you the 20, 25 minutes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks so very much, Chair. Dr. Banda. Quite good to be here to present, and I'm glad to be doing this after Dr. Madikonza and Professor Shumba, who are very great people, and I've spoken to you about some of the work they are doing. And, you know, for this particular session, what I want to actually speak to is one of the projects that has more or less put into action some of the ideas that my previous two colleagues have actually spoken about. And this particular project looked very strongly at, you know, the issue of teacher capacity in South Africa. And there is a project we started with the Fundisa for Change in 2019, which was about developing capacity for South Africa in terms of teachers involved in teaching economic and management sciences, as well as, you know, business studies. So we're looking at the senior phase and the FET phase. So before I present, I want to actually acknowledge my very wonderful colleague, Mrs. Shanu Maisa. She's here, and she'll be speaking at the end of the presentation to one of the most important achievement of the project, which I feel very strongly we really should talk about, because it's a big deal. And I feel very strongly that in the next few minutes, I'll be able to at least convince you that we are adding value in terms of the kind of partnership we've had with the Fundisa for Change brand in this particular context. So when we started this project, the overarching question that drove what we were trying to do as an intervention was, how do we integrate the notions of sustainability and green economy into the senior phase in terms of the economic and business sciences, and then business studies in terms of the FET phase. So in the FET phase, we're looking at grade 10, grade 11, and grade 12 in terms of business studies. And for the senior phase, grade 7, 8, and 9, we're looking at EMS, which is more or less the introduction to the commerce phase, especially for learners interested in the commerce stream in South African high schools. And one of the interesting part of this project, which I must actually share with you, is the fact that it's an intervention project basically looking at bringing ESD, which is Education for Sustainable Development, into the notion of the curriculum, the school curriculum within South Africa. And currently, there are different ideas, different pockets of ideas in terms of how sustainability could be introduced into the curriculum, but it's not integrative enough for the learners to actually make the link and for the teachers to be able to present the link even to the learners. So the project is actually a series of partners, and you can see the partners, quite a number of partners in terms of what exactly is happening. One person I really appreciate, especially for the SST project and the leadership, not just in terms of the scholarship, but also in terms of making sure that there is the intervention actually reaches as many teachers as possible, not just in Southern Africa, but across the world because of her scholarship, is Professor Ella. I know she's here, I know she's listening. I wanted to know that on behalf of all of us involved in the project, we really appreciate your leadership, and more importantly, your tenacity in making sure that the work around ESD keeps gaining ground in Southern Africa and Africa and the rest of the world. When we started the project, the first thing we did was to go online to develop 4 modules. And the 4 modules are actually module 1, 2A, 2B, and then 3. And even though they are 4, there are actually integrating notions of sustainability across EMS, notions of sustainability around business studies, but more importantly, we're also trying to operationalize how the teachers will use those notions in the curriculum to teach the learners. However, the foundation are 8 pillars. And those 8 pillars, as you can see on the screen, actually are the pillars. They are more or less like the beam holding the 2 other modules, which rest on, which is EMS and business study, but also trying to bring in how the teachers will operationalize the knowledge they gain through this particular project in the classroom with the learners, to make sure that at least the learners can make the connection between sustainability, the economy, issues around what the business is and things like that. Because at the end of the day, we all have to take responsibility in terms of the way we manage the environment, including the commerce course that we are talking about. So in total, we had about 120 teachers, and these are in-service teachers. And they come from 5 provinces in South Africa. Between the months of March and May 2021, we had online sessions with them. I won't go into the details of how we operationalize that, but I think this is actually good enough to make sense of in terms of what we have done. And the participation was absolutely phenomenal. This is part of the structure of what we did. We had 2 sessions running on each Saturday. The first 2 hours is for EMS, and the second 2 hours is actually for business studies. Normally we have a break within 15 minutes just to make a changeover. Some of the teachers who were also teaching EMS grade 7, 8, and 9 were also involved in teaching business studies grade 10, 11, and 12. But we were able to actually give them data. And what I must actually share with you, especially since we are talking about assessment, is that assessment was quite integrative in terms of what we do right from the beginning, right from ground zero, and I will speak to that. These are the great people we work with in Northwest. Dr. Prisha Ramsarop, which is one of my colleagues and an amazing, in fact, to be sincere with you, without her, we wouldn't have been able to even get this project on the ground, because this project is housed within the Real Center at the School of Education, University of the Witwatersrand. And I must also acknowledge here the role of Dr. Ramsarop, because she's such a great person to work with. Dr. Madikonza is also here. He's part of the program. And I will show you the pictures of the wonderful people we work with. These are the colleagues from Northwest. And this is the online platform we use. One wonderful person I also want to acknowledge is Professor Yurita Rosenberg. I hope she's here and she can listen to me. She is an amazing part of the team, as well as my colleague from Northwest University, who is Mrs. Danielle Kruger. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. Prof. Rosenberg, if you're here, I want you to know that I really appreciate you, because your role through the entire process in getting us to complete the green economy online course is actually very phenomenal. These are the wonderful people that are involved. You can see Professor Rosenberg is there, Dr. Madikonza is there, my colleague as well, and I must mention this, Mrs. Elisha, she's right there. She's such an amazing person, and she's also part of the entire project, as well as Dr. Blake. Dr. Blake also played an important role. I mean, this is more or less a partnership project, as well as my colleague, Mrs. Tanasha Raju. These are all the people involved, and you can see them. And then Christelle as well. Yes, Christelle from Northwest University. Great people, and you can see this is one of the meetings we had, and this is one, I think this was one of the debriefing sessions after finishing one of the meetings. So I'm not going to speak through this, and I just want to say, in terms of assessment, we took assessment as really very integrative through the entire process. We were trying to make sense of the knowledge they came up with. No. First of all, what exactly is the knowledge they had at the beginning in terms of coming into the program? Many of them, so we had a pre-course assessment, and that pre-course assessment was to assess, was to evaluate their understanding. And we were able to use that as ground zero to build in terms of the knowledge that we wanted to share with them. And so, I mean, in terms of assessment, it was not just about the measuring, it was also about trying to assess the progress through the process. It was evaluative. I mean, we were also able to engage with them in different ways. And I must actually share, and I'm going to share with you one of the ways we assess them on an online platform just to assist them. So these are some of the pre-course questionnaire. I'm not going to spend more time here, but basically now you can see how we actually assess them right from the beginning. In this particular case, we're asking them, how do they make the link between ESD and economic and management sciences as well as business studies? And some of them, most of them strongly disagree that there wasn't a link. And I will show you. So, and these are some of the things that they came up with in the pre-course questionnaire. One of them said this assessment has been an eye-opener to what I should expect from the course. So before we even started the course, we were trying as much as possible to prepare them for exactly what they should expect, and they were very, very quite communicative. They expressed exactly what they wanted to, what they expect to learn, and to a very large extent, we're also able to build on that particular understanding. Now, this is one part I really want to speak to. We have never done this before because initially when we were actually putting the project together, we were meant to travel to each of those provinces involved in the project for us to work with them. What we did in terms of assessment was, especially online, was to use a platform which we call Slido. And I'll share with you some of the few things we did in real time, just to at least help them understand precisely what we're trying to actually get at. And this is one of the assessment that we had with them. And we had this on the 17th of April. This was the second session. We had 5 different questions to assess them, and you can see their participation. What I'm quickly going to do now is to show you precisely what, let me quickly show you this so that at least you can make sense of precisely what we did here. Let me just show you this. And as I said, and that's the beauty of exactly working with the kind of team we worked with. To be sincere with you, because when you look at trying to do things like this in the pandemic, we had never done it. We didn't, but just by working in partnership with the different institutions and the different capabilities involved in the collaboration, we were able to do things like this. So if you look at this, for instance, we're actually asking them, what items are you filling up your trash bag? Because remember, we were looking at issues of sustainability. Sustainability speaks not just to the environment, but it also speaks to practices in terms of what the teachers are doing. Are you able to recycle, reduce, reuse, repurpose these items? You can see the responses. These are responses we got in real time, and these are the kind of ideas we got from them. So the circular flow is a concept in economics. Do you think the way we engage the notion will change going forward because of the pandemic? So these are some of the responses we also had. And you can see from here that the number of people responding in real time, were quite interesting. And these are actually teachers. These were teachers sharing. In real time, we were able to assess the progress they were making in terms of the notions we were sharing with them. And this for us, believe me, is something really very potent, because at the end of the day, the teachers were able to share a series of experiences which I must actually acknowledge were really very helpful in engaging the notions of sustainability and green economy within the project. So these are some of the ideas, and these are some of the things. So we use Mentimeter as well. And with Mentimeter, we're able to ask them what exactly comes to mind when you think of green economy. Many of them mention sustainability, environment, recycling, growth, clean and plants and the land development as well. So these are some of the online activities we had. So we had this on business studies on the 27th of March, 2021, and I'm not going to bore you, but one thing I want you to observe is here. We were asking them about the future they want. And look at what someone said here. Said less is better. Less is actually better, meaning it's not so much about just acquiring and acquiring. It's also important for us to, at least within the pandemic. And you can also see the issue of women's rights and some of these issues actually came in. So it was quite an extensive and very integrative and participatory process with the teachers online. And believe me, I'm really looking forward to us actually working on this in the nearest future and extending it to other countries, since especially we can do it online. So these are issues around assessment, but something I really want to actually ask, and I'm going to call Shanu here to speak to this because this is an important part of the entire process. So at this point in time, Shanu, I know you're there. Will you be kind to speak to this in just a few minutes? We have about 4 minutes left. I want you to actually speak to this because this is really very key and very integral part of this entire process. So Shanu, will you be kind to please speak to this in about 2-3 minutes?
Okay. Thank you, Emmanuel. I think I just want to say that the work that we're doing is SACE endorsed, South African Council of Educators endorsed. And this kind of work that we're doing is to work within a system. It's not about working outside of a system. So it's ensuring that the work that is happening in all the courses is systemic work. It's involved in directly providing teachers with the professional development that's required. So in South Africa, it's registered with the South African Council for Educators, and teachers engaging in all of this work will receive continuous professional development points. And teachers view that as very significant in their own learning. And so I just want to highlight that in this case, teachers will gain approximately, if they do both the EMS and the business studies, will receive about 60 continuous professional development points. And that is quite important because it's also that teachers can then monitor and take ownership of their own learning, and at the same time monitor their own professional development and also compile their own professional development portfolios so that it's within a system. So I'm going to, and also I think in the Fundisa program, the two things that are very important is also linked to very particularly the idea of acquisition and participation and acquisition. And those two concepts are quite critical in the whole education landscape, because diagnostics are showing that a lot of kids in South Africa are not able to answer the basic questions linked to the curriculum work. So there's two things we're very strongly focusing on, and that is, if we're talking about significant learning, it's to identify how teachers or educators are linking to the idea of acquisition, which is your foundational knowledge concepts, but also with the idea of participation and how they are participating, and therefore then linking to the ideas of care and humanity, etc. And then the second key thing that I think I must emphasize here is that the idea that assessment and teaching are not two separate things, and that assessment and learning and teaching all go together. I think that's the key that I want to emphasize. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thanks so very much, Shannon. Really appreciate you. And believe me, this is something that we feel very good about. We are not just doing this for the sake of doing it. We're also doing it and thinking of teacher development just beyond the attendance, but in terms of proper accreditation for their own development. So my parting remark is that, we are going to be writing a paper on this. We are really very interested in making sure that we document this properly. And thank you for listening. We really appreciate you. And to everyone here, both teachers and great people like Professor Rosenberg, Professor Hela, Dr. Ramsarab, my colleagues at Northwest University, at VETA as well, including Shanu, and actually Komotso. I must actually acknowledge Komotso, even though she's not here. I want it to be on record. It's a privilege to be able to work with everyone on this project. Thanks for listening. I'm actually open for questions. And thanks, Dr. Madikonza and Professor Shumba, for presenting before me, at least to prepare the grant for me to speak to this. Really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojo, for the presentation, the practical aspect of it. And I'm sure as participants, we have seen how practical it can be. So it's not just theory, it's something that can be put into practice. We've come to the end of the 3 presentations that we had for the day. And we have, I think, 3 questions in the question and answer section, which I'll read out, and then I'll ask the presenters to come in. And it won't, in as much as the questions may be addressed to one presenter, but the other presenters are free to also come in and chip in whatever they have. But before we go into the question and answer section, I just want to bring up, highlight some of the issues that I got from the 3 presentations that were made. So, for example, in the first presentation by Professor Shumba, some of the things that stood out were the issue of the importance of bringing about in our learners the ability for them to be self-reliant, to be agents for change, to be creative, innovative creatures and critical thinkers, and to be collaborators. So in our assessment process, when we are assessing whatever we have taught them, and remember the last presentation by Shelley, where they talked about learning and assessment being looked at as one and the same thing. So they're not disjointed. So whatever you assess should be based on whatever you have taught or whatever has been in the learning process, and vice versa. So that's those things, the elements that Professor Shumba talked about are things that we're supposed to think about when we are assessing. But we can't assess on these unless we have brought them in our learning process in the first place. And the other important thing that I saw from the presentation was the fact that with assessment, or with ESD learning and its assessment, it calls for us, even as educators, to look at the process of learning and assessment in a different way. There is need for a mindset, a change of mindset, because we won't look at it as business as usual. We won't be assessing or teaching the way we used to. There is a way in which things are changing. And with that, I think at the end of my summary, I'll bring in a question to the presenters on the practical issues of how this can be done. The third issue was on the importance of the interdependence of the competencies. He brought up the issue of significant learning and the components that come in it, and how these cannot be looked at in isolation, but are supposed to be well integrated if we really are to have that significant kind of learning taking place. And then from Dr. Mandikoza, who was continuing from where Professor Shumba left off, he showed us the rubric of how the questioning and assessment was done. And from my take on it was that the way we ask questions, it goes back to the issue of not looking at things from a business as usual way of perspective, but then there has to be a total mindset, and not just from the learner's perspective, but also from the educators, because the way we frame the questions will determine how the learners are going to respond and whether we will realize what we're looking for in talking of the significant kind of learning. And there was also the issue of holistic approach to ESD that takes on, as you look at it in the light of the components of the significant learning. If you look at the example that Dr. Mandikoza gave, it was from a simple question that you had all these elements coming about, but it all boiled down to how the question was framed, which begged of the learner to bring about or to exhibit the skills, the different skills, the critical thinking, the problem solving, and all other elements that we look for in ESD assessment. And in Dr. Ojo's presentation, one thing that I found important was how the importance of taking into consideration the learners or the participants' prior knowledge. Coming as empty slates, they come in with prior knowledge, and it is the importance of bringing that into consideration is that it helps us build on what we are supposed to bring forth to them. And also the importance of collaboration. He talked about how he's worked with the various people with different strengths, and together they came up with this wonderful initiative that he's presenting today. And as participants, I think that's what we're supposed to thrive for as well in our community of practice, where we are bringing in people with different talents, with different capabilities that together will build up these change project ideas that we have. And so the last thing in Dr. Ojo's as well was the integrative nature of ESD. We've talked about how when you're looking at ESD, in as much as we're focusing on the goal number 4, the sustainable development goal number 4, but then it is all encompassing. And in Dr. Ojo's presentation, we've seen how in talking about economics and business studies, you've touched on issues of women's rights, you've touched on issues of consumerism, where you're talking about little is better in the lives that we're living. So that's also, those are the things that came out as the presenters were presenting and what I got from it. But probably the question that I have that I would like the presenters to bring up to address in line with assessment is that for most of us in our institutions, we're still in that traditional way of assessment where we're assessing students for examination and not for futuristic things or critical thinking. And so how do you deal with it? How do you transition? How do you manage the transition from switching from exam-oriented type of assessment to this assessment, which brings about significant learning? And so those were my the summary of it all, and then the question that would like to be addressed. I'll go through the question and answer, and then I'll ask the presenters to feel free to add on. So the first one is from David Maguza, which says, help me on the 6 significant learning categories. And then the second one is from Bilingi Abisalom, which says, thank you, Professor Shumba, for the wonderful presentation. I think Lee thinks significant learning framework is a good framework to use when we are implementing competency-based curriculum in primary and secondary schools. My question is, how did you integrate the framework in your change project, specifically the change project done in Zambia? And the last question from John Nguluwe is, how can we reduce subjectivity when assessing learners' initiatives? To some of the facts that a learner has applied classroom knowledge to improve the environment is already an A+. So we have those 3 questions, which I think on your screen as presenters, you can also go to and refer to. So I will open the floor to the 3 presenters, so you can address whichever question you find comfortable with, and in whichever order. There is no particular order. So over to you, presenters. Thank you.
Well, perhaps Stefan, I can start. And for David's question, I think it came earlier before Caleb had started the presentation on the second part. And I think that would have clarified, unless if you needed another, to raise another question. And then for
all right, so David, could you indicate in the...
Sorry, the network is going down. Hello?
Perhaps she could type the question.
Oh,
in the chat section if your issues have been addressed, or if you need.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm losing the network from this side. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Prof.
Yes.
Yes, and then for Absalom, I think he's absolutely right about significant learning and competence-based learning outcomes. But the second question is about how we are using the significant learning framework. in Zambia. And I must say that you too are likely to use this kind of thinking, especially as you undertake activities in learning action number 4. It's one of the assignments to begin to think about what kind of assessments we can be able to do. And perhaps to illustrate this point, let me just quickly share screen and show you what one assignment I've just quickly picked from the platform there. You're going to see here that in learning action number 4, there is an assignment where they are going to say exactly how they are going to be using some of the ideas which they are learning in there. And in Zambia, we can see that some of our participants are trying to come up with assessment tools which try to take this into account. And we can begin to see here, for example, that instead of thinking just of paper and pencil tests, they begin to think about, for example, observations which can be used in assessments, and the use of open-ended questions about their work, so that they can begin to appreciate what the open responses are going to be like. The issue of performance is beginning to feature in their thinking. And so I would say that this framework is beginning to be used to encourage thinking outside the box of the usual assessments. You can see how this particular community of practice is beginning to think about using concept maps, auditions, which are performance-based, and so this is quite important. We could go on and on with this, but these are now available assignments which they have done. And for Ngulube, there is a point about subjectivity, and I think as educators, our work is subjective, even the way we choose the experiences which we present to learners. And so I think in assessment, subjectivity has to be also reflective. And this is why when you look at the presentation which Caleb made, he presented the rubric, which provides us with a clear criteria of what to look for. And those criteria and levels of performance are available to the learners so that they can begin to even self-assess themselves to begin to appreciate, am I getting to this level or not? Am I achieving this criterion or not? And I must say that in the education system in Zambia, one of the reforms which has been undertaken is to introduce school-based assessments. And
Prof, you seem to be breaking.
Responsibility to teachers. And so it is quite important to see that that opens up space for teachers and educators to become creative and to begin to explore alternative ways of showing evidence that learning is taking place. Thank you. Thank you, Tiffany. Sorry for taking so long.
I think we have lost Dr. Tiffany. Caleb, you may have an input. You can just come in.
Yes, my comment. My comment is that the purpose of what I found useful is to use assessment for learning. And if you use assessment for learning, then it helps the learners to improve themselves. So you give them a task, and with that task, you don't hide the targets, and you give them a rubric which gives them the potential performances. So it is one way of avoiding bias, and the student themselves should be able to judge how far they've gone with their task response. So that way you reduce bias. Thank you. And in any way, as Prof. Shumba has already highlighted, by the time that you choose to assess a certain form of performance or competencies, you already have personal values into it. Assessment is not value free. So we can't run away from those biases of your own interest, but you can try by all means to make it objective by coming up with a tool that you use, you give the students to measure their own performance against it, and then you also use it for you to assess their performance in that activity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Perhaps we can just have a short comment from Dr. Ojo, and then we ask Prof. Heller to close the webinar.
Yeah, thanks so very much. I think what I want to really add to this discussion is the importance that we need to think beyond a pre-COVID context, especially when it comes to teaching and learning and assessment. And I've actually shared with you an intervention we did in a totally non-traditional way, purely online with teachers that have not been exposed to such before. And I shared with you exactly the kind of intervention that we put together using a multi-partnership approach. And I think going forward, we just have to think of the hybrid and blended classroom and continue to ask ourselves that how do we blend assessment of learning for learning and as learning into that kind of context. Because I mean, going forward, it will be business as usual. Either we accept it or not. Even though it might not fully operate, I mean, it might not be fully operational because of the bandwidth and the infrastructure differences or disparities across Africa, including Southern Africa. It's something that we need to start thinking about, even as educators, because at the end of the day, the way we live, work, and learn, considering the pandemic and where we are now, will increasingly change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we close, I see a hand from Richard. Richard, you can come in if you have something to say.
No, it's a mistake.
Okay, thank you so much. Over to you, Prof. Heller, for the closing remarks.
Thanks, Ben. I'm just trying to unmute. Have you got me?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so if I can also just add a big thank you to everybody for today's sessions. Prof. Shumba, it's always fantastic to hear you. And every time I hear you and Caleb with that assessment framework, I think, wow, we've got some very important innovation that this network is working with. And I really want to encourage colleagues to work with that assessment. You know, we say it's the assessment flower because it makes assessment just feel better when we think about how to do, you know, better quality assessment and assessment that is meaningful and assessment that assesses significant learning. And even better if we can assess significant ESD learning. So I really want to encourage everybody to, you know, go into Learning Action 4, to have a close look at the work that Professor Shumba and Caleb presented to you today. And then I want to thank Emmanuel for coming in on behalf of the Fundisa team and just sharing that new innovation in the Fundisa for Change program, which is a module on green economy for teachers. And the most interesting thing is that, you know, we want our societies to build green economies, as Carolyn indicated to us at the start of this program. You know, the SADC industrialization strategy wants SADC to industrialize within a green economy kind of orientation, but nobody teaches the teachers what green economy is all about. So this is a very big pioneering innovation, Emmanuel, and from the economic and management sciences where you are working, I think it's a leading program on the continent, actually, to work with our teachers to, become more familiar with what is the meaning of green economy, so that they also have the capacity to teach that in their programs, both in schools, but also in technical and vocational education settings. So I really appreciate the time that you took this morning. I know things are very, very busy for you, and that you've had many stresses and challenges at Wits University. Just to also mention and share our condolences that the Wits University School of Education lost their head of school to COVID very recently, and Emmanuel has been standing in for the head. So we really appreciate the time that you took today, Emmanuel, you and Caleb from a school that is under pressure. And I think we have tomorrow, Charles, maybe, I don't know if you want to say anything, but tomorrow morning we have a session in which we will have a discussion about where we're going next. We've come to the end of 3 weeks of webinars now. So we will be discussing the break. We're going to have a little break between now and the last week of October, when we'll have another set of webinars. And in the break, it will be a break from webinars, but not a break from cluster meetings. And it will also, we'll want everybody to continue to work on the online course. I saw such a nice WhatsApp yesterday from Cindy. She said, we're all working individually on the online course, and we're working collectively and together on our change projects. Isn't that just such a lovely way of seeing how the SST program is working? And then we gather regionally across our countries for these webinars. So a fantastic way of seeing the program. Cindy, thank you for sharing that way of framing things yesterday. It really helped even me to think about how are we doing this whole program together, as we're all learning to do e-learning, go online to do webinars, go back into our institutions to make real practice happen, so that we're not just sitting on the cloud all day. Yeah, so I wanted to say very big thank you. Thank you to Ben also, and to the team. I don't know, Charles, if you've got any final points that you want to make before we close.
No, not really, Hannah, but just to thank everyone for the enthusiasm, for the energy, and thanks Prof. Shumba, Caleb, Tiffany, and Ojo. Thank you so much. We are so excited to be in this webinar. Thank you very much. Please, participants, colleagues, please continue with your course, with your assignments on the course platform. We'll be getting support from the reference group members and from the ROTS team. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day further.
Thank you very much.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.